Imagine you have just taken the throne after a catastrophe and a change of power. Your signature is a verdict, a tax, and a new history. And here comes something awkward. Gigantic glass palaces are rising around the world. One principle, one design, one scale. The deadlines mock your progress. If people put this together, they will not see an exhibition. They will see a system that functioned without you. Thus, a competitor emerges for your throne. The old order, the old power, the old law. And you cease to be the sole source of legitimacy. With one decree, the palaces become a national pride. Documents are sealed, witnesses turn into nuts, and the excess disappears into archives and accidental fires. What will you choose? To allow people to ask questions? Or to erase traces so that they remember only the celebration of glass, not the reason it was later burned? Now let's see how this looked in real history. Have you ever wondered why in 1851 gigantic glass structures began to rise all over the planet simultaneously? London, Munich, New York, Madrid, Sydney, St. Petersburg. As if by the command of an invisible conductor, the same project is launched at different ends of the world. Not the national ambitions of individual monarchs, but something more. A global operation, synchronized with the precision of a clockwork mechanism. It cannot be a coincidence. Empires that have waged war against each other for centuries over scraps of land suddenly act in unison. In London, the foundation is being laid in March 1850. In New York, the designs begin in the same month. Munich announces a competition for projects a week after London, as if they received the same order from a single command center. Moreover, the technical solutions are identical. Prefabricated metal structures, modular system of glass panels. Even the bolts have the same thread. Who coordinated this operation? What power had authority over the warring monarchies? Take a calculator and just calculate. The Crystal Palace in Hyde Park, 564 meters long, 33 meters high, an area of almost 74,000 square meters, the size of a modern international airport. And we are told that this miracle was built in just 9 months. 9 months in an era when there was no electricity, welding, trucks, or tower cranes. Everything was held together with rivets and bolts. According to official data, only 2,000 people worked on the construction site. To meet such timelines, they had to install 1,000 glass panels every hour, without stopping for sleep or food. This is physically impossible. But the strangest thing is not the speed. The strange thing is why empires spent colossal budgets on structures that existed for 6 months and then burned down. We are used to great powers building for centuries. The Roman Colosseum has stood for 2,000 years. The Egyptian pyramids, 5. But the crystal palaces of the mid-19th century were built for months and then disappeared in flames. Why? Because they were not monuments of greatness. They were temporary technical structures, tools for addressing an urgent task, a task that arose after the previous world collapsed. And before understanding their purpose, one must ask a simple question. Where did the material for such a synchronous operation come from? In the mid-19th century, sheet glass was a luxury item. The technology for its production remained complex, expensive, and slow. And for the London Palace, 300,000 sheets of perfect quality were required. 300,000. No factory of that time, according to archival data on production capacities, could produce such a volume even in a year. But the glass appeared. Where did it come from? There are two possible answers. Either they were taken from the warehouses of those who came before us, or the production technologies were completely different and they were hidden from us. Note the effect of ready-made materials. Cast iron structures, bolts, glass panels. Everything was prepared in advance. Everything appeared too quickly, too synchronously. Modern shopping centers with cranes and computer-aided design take years to build. Yet here, 2,000 workers managed to complete it in a time frame that today seems fantastic, even considering automation. What if all this glass was not specially produced? What if it was simply found? In the mid-19th century, there was a large-scale clearing of cities from clay debris around the world, remnants of the catastrophe of 1816. Palaces, cathedrals, and industrial complexes are being excavated beneath the layers of dirt. And what do we see in these buildings? Huge windows with remnants of glass panels. But this is not primitive glass from the candle era. These are perfectly flat sheets, surpassing in quality what we learned to make only by the end of the 20th century. Look at the thickness of these panels, at their transparency, at the lack of air bubbles and deformations. Modern sheet glass production requires furnaces with temperatures above 1,000 degrees, precise control of the chemical composition, vacuum chambers. Yet in the 19th century, we are told that glass was blown by hand, rolled on tables, cut with diamond cutters. Such glass always has irregularities, always cloudy, always with defects. But the glass in the crystal palaces was perfect, too perfect for its time. The new owners simply dismantled the glass from the ruins of a forgotten civilization, cleaned it, and used it for their purposes. This explains both the speed of the material's emergence and its quality. There was no need to produce anything. Everything was already there. It only needed to be dug up, cleaned of clay and dirt, sorted, and installed. That's why such a large number of panels appeared seemingly out of nowhere. They really did come out of nowhere, from a buried past. And the cast iron columns, of which 3,300 were required, weighed a total of 4,500 tons. Where did metal of such volume come from in just a few months? The material has been found. But who could have designed such a marvel of engineering? And here begins the theater of the absurd. Joseph Paxton. Have you heard this name? Do you know who he is? An engineer of world renown. An architect with decades of experience. No. He is a gardener. An ordinary gardener who built greenhouses for the Duke of Devonshire. Consider the absurdity of the situation. The greatest empire in the world, Britain, upon which the sun never sets, chooses to design a symbol of its power, a gardener. A man who until that moment had been engaged in growing orchids and pineapples in the greenhouses of a wealthy man. His greatest achievement is a glass pavilion for exotic plants the size of a small house. And this man is entrusted with designing a structure the height of a 10-story building and longer than 5 football fields, which is meant to become the face of the nation. The official version states that it was the experience of building greenhouses that allowed him to create the design of the Crystal Palace. That he simply scaled up his greenhouse, increased the sizes, and voila, the masterpiece is ready. But engineering does not work like that. You cannot just take and increase a structure 100 times. The laws of physics change with scale. Loads increase not linearly, but geometrically. What works for a pavilion 10 by 10 meters will collapse at sizes 500 by 120. Completely different calculations are needed. Different engineering, different materials. Historians themselves slip up. They tell us the truth, but we do not hear it. It really was a greenhouse. a giant industrial greenhouse. But what was grown in this greenhouse, the size of several football fields? Palms for the delight of Queen Victoria's eyes? Exotic flowers? Don't make me laugh. Building a structure of such scale, spending the budget of a small state just to show the public ficuses, this is economically absurd. Any authority is pragmatic. If something is being built, it must bring specific benefits. Pay attention to the climate inside these palaces. The construction created a stable greenhouse effect. The temperature remained at 24 degrees regardless of the weather outside. Humidity was 60–70%. The glass filtered out harsh ultraviolet light, but allowed all the spectrum necessary for photosynthesis to pass through. These are not conditions for displaying steam engines and looms. Humidity is harmful to metal. It is devastating for fabrics and carpets. It is lethal for paintings. But for biological processes, humidity and warmth are the basis of life. Paxton did not invent anything new. He simply restored what he saw in the ruins. The gigantic greenhouses of the former world, where unknown crops, or even something else, were grown, still stood under the debris. Their glass domes partially survived. The gardener of the Duke gained access to these structures, sketched the designs, and presented them as his own invention. He was awarded a knighthood not for genius, but for silence. He knew that he was copying the legacy of the vanished builders, not creating. But to admit this meant to acknowledge the existence of a civilization that surpassed Victorian England. So, the greenhouse was built. Huge, industrial scale. But what exactly were they growing in it? To understand this, let's look at the demographics. After 1816, the year without a summer, the year of catastrophe, cities around the world stood half empty. Then, starting from the middle of the century, something strange happens. The population begins to grow exponentially. In conditions of high child mortality, unsanitary conditions, and lack of medicine, cities suddenly fill up with people. Women could not give birth so quickly and in such large numbers. The mortality statistics of that time indicate the opposite. The survival rate of infants was extremely low, but the population was growing. Where did it come from? Here we encounter the phenomenon of orphan trains. In the middle of the 19th century, hundreds of thousands of homeless children appeared all over the world. They were called foundlings. In the United States alone, from 1854 to 1929, more than 250,000 orphan children were transported. 250,000 children without parents. Think about this number. It is the population of an average city. A whole city of children who have no mothers and fathers. Where did they come from in such numbers? Where are their parents? There was no war. There was no epidemic of plague either. There was no mass famine. Why do the chronicles remain silent about the mass death of the adult population? If the parents died from disease, there should be records of a pandemic. If from war, there should be battles in the chronicles. But none of this exists. The response is horrifying. Their parents died in the 1770s, not from natural epidemics, from biological weapons that the empires used to clear out rebellious territories. These children are the last descendants of the destroyed civilization. Their grandfathers built cities with 7-meter doors. Their grandmothers lived in palaces that we now call historical monuments. But in the 1770s, smallpox swept through their lands. Not an accidental epidemic, a planned operation. The technology was tested on their own children. In the Moscow orphanage, thousands of orphans died from experiments to create a vaccine. The elite received protection. The people were left defenseless and perished. By the middle of the 19th century, only children remained. Thousands, tens of thousands of children without parents, without a language, without a memory of their people. They were gathered, loaded onto trains, distributed across abandoned territories. And they were told, "You are orphans. You never had a homeland. You come from nowhere." But the truth is that they are from here. This is their land, their cities, their palaces. They were just turned into a labor force for new owners. However, there are trains with children, trains that move from east to west across America. Hundreds of children in each train, silent, obedient, without tantrums, without demands to go home, as if they never had a home. At the stations, they are unloaded like goods. Farmers choose themselves workers. They look at teeth, at muscles, at obedience, like when buying livestock. The children do not resist. They go with strangers without tears, as if this is how it should be, as if they were made for this. These children appeared out of nowhere. They filled the shelters. They were sent to develop the vacant territories, new farmers, new workers for the factories, new soldiers. They did not remember their parents. They had no past. Perfect cogs for the new system. Perfect citizens of the new world being built on the ruins of the old. But the history of this project did not begin in the 50s. It began nearly a century ago. In 1764, a huge building was erected in Moscow. Officially, it was an orphanage. In reality, it was a secret laboratory. Experiments were conducted on thousands of children. The mortality rate reached 98%. Vaccination technologies were tested on their bodies. They learned to accelerate growth on their lives. Knowledge was gained from their deaths that would later be applied on an industrial scale. By the 70s of the 18th century, the technology was ready. The elite received the smallpox vaccine. And then the second phase began. A biological cleansing of the territories. Smallpox was unleashed as a weapon. Siberia, Kazakhstan, the Urals, lands marked on old maps as Greater Tartary. One territory after another became desolate. The elite were protected, the people were not. 1816 dealt the final blow. The year without a summer. A disaster of planetary scale. Those who survived the smallpox did not survive hunger and cold. The cities were completely deserted. But the infrastructure remained. Palaces, factories, ports, railways. Everything awaited new owners. And here we return to the Crystal Palaces, to their true purpose. It is an official fact. Incubators for infants were exhibited at fairs in the late 19th century. Yes, this is not a fantasy. In Europe and America, the public was shown glass cases with premature babies. This was presented as a miracle of medicine, as an attraction. People paid money to see infants in glass vials. Imagine this picture. You come to an exhibition. Around are steam machines, weaving looms, stuffed exotic animals. And here, in a separate pavilion, rows of glass boxes. In each, a live child. Tiny, pink, connected to tubes, breathing, moving. And around is a crowd of onlookers. They point fingers. They discuss. They marvel at the progress of medicine. No one asks the question, where do so many premature babies come from? Why did their parents give them up as curiosities? And why has a technology that was supposed to save lives in hospitals turned into a circus show? But what if this was not a demonstration of new technology, but the remnants of a working system? A showy cover for the true process. You hide the forest by putting a few trees on display. You say, look, here is our achievement. This is how we save the premature. And behind the scenes, there are hundreds more of those boxes. Thousands. And there, they do not save those born prematurely. They grow them from scratch. Look at the old engravings of interior spaces. What do we see there? Huge, empty spaces, strange reservoirs, fountains that resemble more fluid circulation systems, and numerous snow-white antique sculptures with perfect proportions. Where are the exhibits? Where are the machines and locomotives for the demonstration of which these pavilions were supposedly built? Look at the excessive ventilation and heating systems. They are too complex for a simple exhibition hall where people walk around in outerwear. Why maintain a tropical microclimate in London for an exhibition of metal structures? Metal does not need humidity. It is harmful to it. But for biological processes, humidity and heat are critically important. Crystal palaces functioned as giant biofactories. Inside, optimal conditions were created for the accelerated growth of biomass. The technology was not theirs. It is the legacy of those who built these cities. The previous world likely used such complexes for growing plants or even cloning. The conquerors adapted the discovered technology for their needs. Mass production of labor for resettling desolate territories. But any technology leaves traces, and the main trace is fire. London, New York, Munich. All the crystal palaces disappeared in flames. The same scenario, the same conclusion. Glass and iron do not burn at normal temperatures, but they burned. The temperature was extreme. Fire is the perfect way to destroy biological remains, documentation, and equipment. After the fire, only a melted frame remains, which is quickly dismantled for scrap metal. Ends in water. More precisely, in ash. The official version is always the same. An accident, a short circuit, a fallen candle. But study the history of fires more closely. The Crystal Palace in London burned down in 1836, exactly 85 years after its opening. The one in New York in 1858, 5 years after its construction. The one in Munich in 1867. All the fires occurred at night. All when there were no visitors inside. All started simultaneously in several points of the building. The temperature was so high that metal structures melted, turning into puddles, but the wooden furniture in adjacent rooms remained untouched. Selective destruction. Targeted cleanup. The project was designed for 15 to 20 years. That was enough to grow the first generation of new people, those who were to inhabit the deserted megacities of the forgotten empire. By the 1870s, the task was completed. Factories were no longer needed. Moreover, they were dangerous. Too obvious evidence of interference. Therefore, the destruction protocol is initiated. One by one, Palaces are engulfed in flames. This is not an accident. This is a cleanup of evidence. The factories are destroyed, but the products needed to be prepared for life in a foreign world. And here the school comes into play. Note that the Prussian model of education appears everywhere simultaneously with the Crystal Palaces, synchronously, around the world. This is not a place for creativity and development. This is a factory conveyor. The bell rings for class. The bell rings to end class. Strict discipline, rote learning, uniforms. This is programming. The Prussian system was created for training soldiers, people who do not think but follow orders. Stood up at the bell, sat down, opened a book, repeated after the teacher, memorized, answered, received a grade. No creativity, no questions, only obedience and execution. And suddenly this system begins to be implemented everywhere. In America, in Russia, in France, in Japan. Different countries, different cultures, different languages, but the same education system. Why? Children raised in incubators needed to have an operating system installed, to give them a language, basic skills for servicing mechanisms, and, most importantly, a false memory of a past they never had. They were clean slates, empty hard drives, ideal material for creating a new humanity that would never know the truth about those who built these cities. School is not education. It is formatting. Deleting the old operating system and installing a new one. Controlled. Look at the surnames. Smith, Miller, Taylor, Kuznetsov, Plotnikov, Melnikov. In the mid-19th century, millions of people received surnames derived from professions. Why? Because these were not family names, but inventory labels. You are a blacksmith. You will be Kuznetsov. You are a miller. You will be Miller. This is not a family. This is a functional designation of a bio-robot in a new economic system. These people had no history, so they were given a function instead of a name. They were given a simplified language. Dozens of adverbs of the global system were replaced with a few standard languages. They were given a false history. Instead of a memory of the planetary empire, tales of fragmented kingdoms and the barbarism of ancestors were loaded. The school of the 19th century is not a place of enlightenment. It is a factory for formatting consciousness to the needs of the new masters. And note that everything else appears simultaneously with the schools. A unified metric system, unified standards for bricks, a unified width for railway tracks, unified time with time zones, standardization, unification, control. But accelerated growth had a price. Study the catalogs of exhibits from those world exhibitions more closely. In addition to machines and steam hammers, prosthetics were exhibited there in huge quantities. Artificial arms, legs, glass eyes, dentures, entire pavilions filled with mechanical replacements for body parts. We are told that this is a consequence of wars. But there were no major world wars at that specific moment. Why such a quantity of spare parts for people? Why was the demand for prosthetics so massive? The response is horrifying. The grown products often had defects. The accelerated growth technology failed. Imagine, you take a process that normally takes 20 years in nature and compress it into 5. The organism grows too fast. The bones do not have time to gain density. The teeth form incorrectly. The organs operate at their limit. And by the age of 30, the body starts to fall apart, literally. Teeth fall out, bones become brittle, limbs fail, vision declines. A generation of the disabled who needed mechanical prosthetics. Moreover, not from injuries and not from illnesses, just from manufacturing defects, factory flaws. But the system could not admit that the products were defective. Therefore, it proposed a solution: mass production of spare parts. At the same exhibitions where incubators were demonstrated, artificial limbs were sold. A complete cycle. Grew, broke, repaired. An industrial conveyor of human material, from creation to disposal. Notice the strange fashion of that time. Corsets, stiff collars. This is not just style. These are exoskeletons, weak spines, underdeveloped back muscles in beings bred in aquatic environments or under reduced gravity in incubators required external support. Women could not walk without corsets, not for beauty, but because their bodies broke down without a framework. Cyborgization of the 19th century. The technologies of the earlier builders were designed for perfection, but the conquerors used them roughly, not understanding the subtleties. They accelerated the processes. They shortened the cycles. They used unsuitable biological matrices. The result was defective production. But the palaces served not only as incubators, they were transmitters. Eyewitnesses claimed that inside the palaces there was always a strange hum, low, barely discernible, but constant. A sound that you feel not with your ears, but with your whole body. The vibration passes through the bones, resonates in the skull, creates a feeling of pressure. Many visitors complained of headaches after prolonged stays inside, of nausea, of a strange sense of submission and apathy. The musical instruments installed there were of gigantic sizes. The pipe organ in the London Crystal Palace had 4,500 pipes, the largest in the world. Some pipes reached 10 meters in height. The diameter of the largest exceeded half a meter. Why such power? For music? A concert hall does not require such a number of pipes. A typical church instrument has several hundred pipes, and that is more than enough. But if the goal is not music, but the generation of certain frequencies, infrasound is sound below the threshold of human perception. We cannot hear it, but the body reacts. A frequency of 7 Hz causes panic. A frequency of 10 Hz affects vision, creating hallucinations. A frequency of 19 Hz resonates with the eyeball, inducing ghostly images. And frequencies in the range from 3 to 7 Hz affect brain activity, suppressing critical thinking and enhancing suggestibility. Glass and metal are perfect resonators. These gigantic volumes created ideal conditions for the propagation of sound waves. These palaces were giant emitters that broadcast the frequency of subjugation throughout the area. They structured not only the water in the incubators, but also the consciousness of those who found themselves within range. The domes and spires of the lost world were receivers of atmospheric electricity, the free energy of the ether. This technology provided free light and heat to the entire civilization. But the new rulers found a different use for it. The crystal palaces were transformed into transmitters. They broadcast not energy, but frequency. The frequency of submission. The grown children spent months inside these resonators. Their brains were shaped under the influence of specific vibrations. The result is a generation incapable of critical thinking, of resistance, a generation of obedient cogs who will never ask, "Who built the cities we live in?" And then the system was turned off. At the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, there is a sharp change in the technological order. We were forcibly transitioned to the hydrocarbon needle, oil, coal, gas, resources that must be extracted with hard labor, transported, sold, and for which one can kill. Ether energy cannot be placed in a barrel and sold for dollars. It cannot be controlled by a meter. Therefore, free energy technologies were declared pseudoscience. The reception domes were dismantled or disguised. The crystal palaces, the last functioning elements of the old system, were to disappear. They were destroyed. The technologies were classified, and humanity was put on a hydrocarbon needle. Now we pay for every watt of energy that was once available from the air. And we think that this is progress. The main reason for the war against the old world is energy, not territories, not resources. Control over the source of free energy. While ether technologies existed, it was impossible to enslave humanity. People could live independently, without meters and taxes. The traces of the operation remain under our feet. Look at the buildings of the 19th century in your city. The ground floors are sunken into the earth. But this is not the main point. The main thing is the basements of these buildings. They go deep down. There, where the communications of the former system have been partially preserved. The forgotten empire was not only on the surface. Beneath the cities existed a grand network of tunnels, pneumatic mail, energy channels. The system is so advanced that we still do not fully understand it. The tunnels are perfectly even. The walls are lined with a material that does not decay over centuries. In some places, strange pipes are found, of an unknown purpose, made of an unknown alloy. They cannot be cut with modern tools. They do not rust. They do not corrode. They just lie there, in the darkness, and wait. After the catastrophe, the upper levels were buried under mud and clay. Entire floors disappeared under the deposits, but the deep communications survived, protected by layers of earth, sealed, forgotten, but functional. And it was to them that the crystal palaces were connected. Look at the old plans. The basements of these buildings are inexplicably deep, 5 floors down. 7, 10. Why does an exhibition pavilion, which will stand for half a year, need such deep basements? The official version speaks of storage and technical rooms, but the truth is that they were seeking access to what lies deeper. The basements of the incubators extended dozens of meters down to where ancient systems still operated. Energy generation systems, water purification systems, ventilation systems. All of this continued to function even when the civilization that built it had vanished. Automation, perfect engineering, technologies designed for millennia of operation without maintenance. Energy was drawn from there to power the incubators. Biological production waste was dumped there. Defective samples that failed quality control were disposed of there. The London Underground was opened in 1863, allegedly on steam traction. Imagine a steam locomotive in a tunnel. Smoke, soot, lack of oxygen. Passengers were supposed to choke in 5 minutes, but they traveled. Moreover, daily. Thousands of people descended underground and calmly traveled kilometers in closed carriages, allegedly filled with suffocating smoke from coal-fired stoves. Physics does not work here. Coal requires oxygen for combustion, a lot of oxygen. In the confined space of the tunnel, the oxygen would run out in minutes. The steam engine would have stalled, and smoke would have filled the entire space, making breathing impossible. But the system worked. Trains ran. People traveled. This means that the propulsion was not steam-based. The steam locomotives were drawn in later to conceal the technologies of fuel-less movement that the new masters found in the underground. Technologies that they did not understand, but could use. It was enough to find a button, to pull a lever, and the system would start. Ancient, perfect, unfailing. They used these tunnels for transporting biomass and resources between the incubators. At night, when the public was sleeping, trains moved underground with cargo that they were not supposed to know about above. Containers, capsules, boxes with bodies. All of this was transported along ancient paths laid out by those who understood what they were doing. Three-level infrastructure. At the top, crystal palaces that capture sunlight and create a greenhouse effect. In the middle, residential and administrative buildings from which management was conducted. At the bottom, ancient tunnels providing transportation and energy supply. 3 tiers of one machine. And the most striking thing, the synchronization of time. Note that it was in the 1880s that time zones were introduced worldwide. Before that, each city lived by its own solar time. But suddenly, everyone was switched to a single standard. Why? To coordinate processes in the incubators. When it is noon in London, a certain cycle begins in New York. When it is midnight in Petersburg, another is launched in Sydney. A planetary conveyor that operates around the clock. In 20 years of factory work, enough biomaterial was produced to populate the vacant territories. According to estimates based on demographic data, from 1850 to 1870, the population of cities grew on average 3 times. In some regions, it was 5 times. That's millions of new people. Where did they come from? Official birth statistics do not explain such figures. But if you add artificial production in incubators to the natural increase, everything adds up. The conveyor worked flawlessly, until there was a failure. The end of the 19th century was marked by strange events, epidemics of madness. People suddenly began to act inadequately. Mass psychoses seized entire cities. Outbreaks of revolutions occurred around the world. Mass riots. As if something clicked in the heads of millions of people simultaneously. The software malfunctioned. Bio-robots began to ask questions. They started to doubt. They began to remember. Perhaps the genetic memory of those whose DNA was used as a basis has awakened. A memory that cannot be completely erased. It is recorded not in the brain, but in every cell of the body, in the structure of DNA. And when the grown children reached adulthood, when their bodies had reached a certain stage of development, this memory began to surface. A glitch in the matrix occurred. The puppeteers realized the project was getting out of control. Too many people were starting to ask uncomfortable questions. Too many felt the falsehood. And then they decided on a great purge. A multi-level operation began. The first level, physical destruction. Crystal palaces turned to ash. But that was not enough. The second level, informational. Libraries lost entire sections of catalogs. Newspapers of that time disappeared from archives. Photographs became inaccessible. The third level, witnesses. People who worked in the incubators died one by one under strange circumstances. Accidents, sudden illnesses, suicides. Over 20 years, the entire chain was broken. New textbooks, new history, new truth. We were given smartphones to distract us, entertainment that consumes every free minute, social networks where we lose ourselves in the endless stream of other people's lives. But they took away technologies of free energy. They took away the knowledge of longevity. They took away the connection with who we were before this incarnation. Crystal palaces have vanished, but their legacy lives on in us. Those who feel a dissonance between official history and reality are carriers of certain genetic markers. Research shows strange patterns. People with a special sensitivity to historical discrepancies have unusual sequences in their DNA. Sequences that do not fit into the evolutionary chain, as if added artificially or taken from another source. Anyone who looks at ancient buildings and intuitively understands that they were not built for us, anyone who asks questions to which official science does not provide answers, we are the result of an experiment. But in our veins flows the blood of those who built these cities, the blood of a bygone world. And one day, this genetic timer will go off. A critical mass of awakened individuals will be reached, and then a return will happen. Not instantly, gradually. Even now, thousands of people around the world are spontaneously beginning to speak in dead languages. Children draw maps of cities that are not in textbooks. Adults recall technical details of mechanisms they have never studied. Doctors document cases where patients under hypnosis describe events from a century ago with the accuracy of archival documents. This is already happening. People find old buildings and instinctively understand their true purpose. They look at the domes of cathedrals and see not decoration, but antennas. They descend into cellars and feel the streams of energy that still flow there. The truth about crystal palaces is just the beginning. Behind it lies the truth about ourselves, about who we were, about what was done to us, and about who we can become again. The genetic code carries information, but it manifests strangely. Study the medical records from the late 19th century. Doctors recorded mass cases of so-called false memories. Patients claim to remember events that never happened, cities that do not appear on maps, languages that no one knows, technologies that do not exist. This was attributed to mental disorders. Sedatives were prescribed. Patients were placed in asylums. But what if it was not an illness? What if memory of a former world was awakening? Memory recorded not in consciousness, but in the very structure of cells. We feel that this world is a decor. Look at the maps of cities from the 19th century. There is a strange pattern. All major crystal palaces are built at the intersections of ancient roads. Roads that existed long before the official founding date of these cities. The London Palace stood at the intersection of ley lines, the energy meridians of the planet. The New York Palace is on the site of an ancient settlement, the age of which archaeologists do not dare to announce. The Petersburg Palace is above mysterious underground structures attributed to Peter, although the technology for their creation exceeds the capabilities of the 18th century. This is not a coincidence. This is the use of existing infrastructure. We look at ancient statues with a longing that we cannot explain. It is not just an interest in art. It is a subconscious search for our true creators. We see the perfection of forms and understand. In the past world, people lived without chronic diseases. Archaeologists find skeletons with perfect teeth, free of cavities. Medical treatises of the 19th century describe people over 90 years old with a full set of healthy teeth. But by the mid-20th century, this became a rarity. We were deceived, globally, cynically, professionally. But any lie leaves traces. Crystal palaces were part of these traces. Now they are gone. Only photographs remain, engravings, contradictory documents, and questions. Many questions to which official history does not provide answers. Because to answer would mean to admit, we live in a world that we did not build. Subscribe to the channel. New investigations are ahead. Each video is another piece of the puzzle, a puzzle that will reveal the truth about who we really are and whose heritage we have appropriated.